All right, in three, two, one. What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Platinum Podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. You might have seen him in a film called Gran Torino back in the day, about 13 years ago. You might have seen his recent article speaking out on Gran Torino and the anti-Asian stuff that's been happening due to coronavirus and all this stuff. But we have B Vang with me. How's it going?
Good, good. It's a Friday, so it's pretty good right now.
Right, right. The weekend has started.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So before we even get into Gran Torino and how you got into that stuff like that, and acting and advocating for Asian rights and stuff like that, what have you been up to ever since after the film?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that question. I was 15 at the time, so
Mm-hmm.
after Gran Torino was released, I was in the midst of graduating and working on college applications, and I had the interest of uh, wanting to get into the school of my choice, which was Brown University.
Right.
And I wanted to complete my liberal arts training and receive a full and well-rounded education. And so I matriculated in 2010, about 2 years later after Gran Torino was made. And during this time, I was engaged in various disciplines, wanting to pursue scholarship and to continue writing and researching. Um, and that took me on the path of doing work in China,
Mm.
studying the Hmong or Miao there. I learned Chinese Mandarin, and I tried to learn the dialect that is spoken by those Miao and Guizhou. Um, and I spent some time in Hong Kong as well, and in different parts of the world, just pursuing interests in agriculture and public policy, urban policy, and food justice movements. And I moved in the direction of wanting to do more cultural criticism. I was very deeply into history, into critical race studies, into gender and sexuality, into political economy, and one thing led to the next, and I wanted to continue working at the intersection of doing political work and uh, working in media.
Mm-hmm.
And that naturally took me on the path of becoming a journalist. And I ended up working at MSNBC with Rachel Maddow, ended up doing some documentary work. I was an apprentice for Laura Poitras. She was the director of the Academy Award winning film um, Citizen Four. That documentary was the first documentary to break the full Edward Snowden leaked NSA papers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I went on to do more policy oriented work at Columbia University, and I was engaged in policy research for a while before I made the decision to pivot back to acting.
Mm.
So that's been about 13 years
Yeah.
of what I have been doing.
So you've been busy. We
Yes.
can say.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to get into that too. Like, did you during those times after the movie and you're getting your education and then finding out you want to be a journalist and then working for MSNBC, did you ever have that inkling of wanting to be an actor again or thinking that it could be still part of your life?
I should also mention that I also wrote for The Economist
Mm,
after MSNBC, but that's less important. I think that I have, but part of the reason why I bring that up is because I enjoy writing so much,
mhm.
and writing is a part of my creative, capacity abilities.
Yeah.
And when I was at Brown, I also participated in several stage productions, and I performed in theater, and I
Mm,
took more courses. I also, when I went abroad, I um, entered a program at the Shanghai Theater Performing Arts Academy, and I learned Chinese opera, and at the same time, I was learning Japanese theater performance.
Mm,
Um, and so I never let the artistic side or the creative side of me go. I was interested in pursuing political work for sure, but I don't think that for me, I see them as as being in opposition to each other. I think
mm.
that there is a false dichotomy that people create about an artist is just an artist and an activist is an activist, or that
Yeah.
one can't be the other.
Mm,
And so for me, that was something that I took with me for most of my young career, and really um, you know, try to keep both and some kind of synergy to keep me going. But ultimately, I came to the decision that I wanted to go back into acting at a full time, and so that's why I ended up moving to LA.
mm. So you're currently in LA right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. And how is it like over there with the whole pandemic? I mean, we're getting a lot better than last year, but how is it over there? Moving over there and like trying to pursue acting again. How is it? How's the experience like?
It definitely has not been easy.
Mm,
When I left New York City, which is where I lived after I graduated from Brown,
mm-hmm,
um, I took off about a couple of months, what I call a sabbatical, to live with my brother and his family in the Twin Cities area. And
mm-hmm.
I grew up in the Twin Cities area. I
Yeah.
consider it my hometown. And um, I moved to LA by the latter half of 2019.
Mm,
So I got there around August, and within a couple of months, COVID happens,
yeah.
and everything gets derailed. I remember at the time when I was living in LA, and these and the experience seems to be true for any huge cosmopolitan and metro area. It just was crazy. It was hectic, and when COVID came, it just became even more crazy.
Mm,
Um, it was just unending and
yeah.
unrelenting, and as the pandemic um, grew, and we went into lockdown, I started developing my own fears and anxieties about going out,
Mm-hmm,
um, because I stood out so much as um, an Asian American person, or just really an Asian person,
yeah.
who really makes that distinction when all that they see is that you are Asian.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point is that, like, I remember going to stores and having people, just walk out of my way, or move out of my path, or look at me if I breathe or even sneeze. Like, you know, um, it was a very terrifying time for me, to
Yeah.
be quite honest with you. And there's just something to be said about the these large cities and the ways that these attacks seem to be sort of happening, um, in these larger coastal cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good segue into your article that you wrote on February 17th. You wrote about how Gran Torino and the Asian slurs that was being used in there kind of mainstreamed Asian or anti-Asian racism. Do you still believe in that? I know it's only been about a month. Do you still believe in that? What you said?
Yes. But I feel like I should clarify several points that I was trying to make in the
Hmm.
piece. I think that a lot of people misconstrued what I had said.
Oh yeah.
Um, And so much of what I was trying to do in the piece was to point out the phenomenon of the laughter at the racist slurs,
Hmm.
and the discussions that I was a part of, because I was in the film and I was talking about the film.
Hmm.
None of that meant that I was trying to cancel anything, nor does it mean that, like, I refuse to see that the function of a racist character in a script in a movie like Gran Torino was precisely to allow us to have conversations about racism.
Hmm.
But there's more than one way to interpret a film, and critics have shown me, critics of my film, of my article, have shown me that despite their invectives against cancel culture, What they're actually after is the monopoly of voice.
Mm.
I spoke only about the phenomenon of laughter and the ways that it mainstreamed, those slurs, and it
Yeah.
did mainstream the slurs. That's not an accusation of the filmmaker's intent.
Mhm.
The I described the film as being laden with slurs because it is. I said that it mainstreamed the slurs and racism because it did. It screened in theaters.
Mhm.
People saw the slurs being said. People heard it. It's on DVDs. It's on Netflix and more. And that to me is pretty mainstream.
Yeah.
And I merely provided my perspective on that. And so much of what I was trying to describe was sidelined by the fact that people wanted to focus on this criticism or the critique that I had about Gran Torino, which
Yeah.
there wasn't a critique. I
Mhm.
didn't call out the filmmakers. Um, all that I spoke about was this laughter and how that laughter was a kind of analog for the
Mhm.
ways that anti-Asian racism gets swept under the rug.
Yeah.
And back then it was laughing. It was, oh, can't you take a joke? Oh, it's just a harmful joke. Gosh, why do you have to take everything so seriously? And
Mhm.
now it's just so weird to see that no one, well, perhaps it's not so weird, but we know why it is that people didn't care and why
Mhm.
people turned a blind eye to the racism in the early days of COVID-19 pandemic. You
Mhm.
know, um, it was obvious that anti-Asian racism was shunted off to a list of non-essentials because of this, and we
Yeah.
know this. We are continuously told that our traumas, our indignities, our distress, and our wounds aren't real enough to be paid attention to.
Mm.
And, this moment of, myself speaking up and of many other Asian Americans speaking up is to tell the world that, or tell the country that we need to be heard and to be seen and not to be dismissed anymore.
Mhm.
Jeremy Lin made this point
Yeah.
pretty convincingly too.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot of people, like you said, misunderstood and misread and just kind of just bypassed your point, really.
Yeah.
They
Oh, yeah.
saw it as an attack
Yeah.
on the film directors, even Clint Eastwood. I saw like some people were saying that. I was like, I mean, he doesn't say anybody. He doesn't even talk about the film really. All he talks about of is the slurs that the film used. That was the only point that you made, and the laughter, and how it's being affected, and it's how it's still happening today. But it's funny how you say that it's being swept under the rug, just as how those critiques and those people who bypassed your article is sweeping under the rug that the point that you're making. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think
Oh,
it's
yeah.
so funny, and it's crazy to think that like people still don't understand and see the things that has been happening. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like they see, and I've seen like so many like comments and stuff like that saying that like, oh, like we as Asian Americans, like it's our time now to face this backlash. It's our time now to, like really be minorities. And I see it as like, well, now not really. We've always been we're like as Hmong people, right? I see it as we're minorities of a minority. So we're
Yeah.
not even close to the lens at all, right? So I think
Mhm.
we don't even have even a mere uh like close to of a voice as they think we do. And I'm glad that you wrote the article just to be like, yeah, we do have a voice, we have somebody that has a voice, you know what I mean? And it's just great to see you bringing and shining a light on something, although people took it the wrong way. Everybody takes something the wrong way nowadays, you know what I
Oh,
mean?
yes, of course. Yeah.
And like going to that too, what would be your message for those who took it the wrong way, or those who misunderstood? Because I know it's hard to like gather when, especially when people are emotional and act on emotion. What would you say to those who took it the wrong way, and like just who wants to understand, who's not just calling, oh well, he took that role for granted, you know what I mean?
Um, yeah, I mean, I believe in free speech. I am a proponent of free speech, but my saying that is not an endorsement of hate speech.
Hmm.
I think that some take this idea of a free market of ideas, um, a laissez-faire approach to free speech too far.
Hmm.
And the idea that the use of such slurs is just a allegorical function in a film. It's just so removed from a world that clearly has not come to terms with itself, with its racism and its inequalities.
Hmm.
And what I've learned is precisely this: that laughing at racism that is passed off as jokes or good-natured humor, as I said in my piece, helps no one. It
Hmm.
just means that those who are the biggest proponents of this kind of free speech are not only endorsing hate speech, but also that they're protecting this kind of free speech at the expense of our humanity and our dignity. And because free speech orthodoxy tends to see all of this discussion about free speech as a zero sum game, it means that this work of social justice must continue until we don't have to choose between our right to speech and the right to be seen as human beings with dignity.
Hmm.
And that's really what my piece was about. And the side thing about that would really respond, that should answer a lot of these critics of mine, is that if they truly insist that the racism in the film is meant to teach us, to be allegorical, to be a parable of some kind that we internalize and learn from, then they clearly should just continue living in their cinematic fantasy of multiculturalism, where
Hmm.
they can process their racism in a collective catharsis through Clint Eastwood's character Walt. You know,
Yeah.
they've shown me exactly that their expressed deference to this film um, should sideline the very real issue of anti-Asian racism.
Hmm.
Is This is why I wrote my piece. This they've shown me that like they are more worried about cancel culture than about coming to terms with the real racism that we are seeing and experiencing acutely every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and how do you feel about, it took a long time for there were so many Asian elders being attacked, uh within the past year and between from the beginning of this pandemic. How do you feel, and what's your thinking of how the media hasn't even, they did it once because there was so much like social media things about it, and so many people post about it, and so many Asian American actors and activists, they post about it, that finally got onto the news. How does that make you feel, and what do you think about that? Like, because for me, when that happened, and it kept happening, and it kept happening, and it kept happening, and nobody was reporting on it, and nobody was speaking out, like news outlets would not talk about it. I only saw it online because I'm Asian and I follow a lot of Asian news,
Right.
and that would be the only reason why people would see it. And if you're not Asian or you don't follow Asian news, you're guaranteed not to know about any of that. So like, what do you think about like the news stations, or like news, because you worked for MSNBC too. So then how do you, like, what do you think about just news stations in general not reporting on all these attacks towards Asians?
This is part of an argument that I was making in my piece.
Hmm.
That
Yeah.
films have allow us to raise certain moral questions. They allow us to process certain things like our traumas, um, and that's why I think that films are so powerful, and that's
Hmm.
why I think that we should take them seriously, and that's why I brought up Gran Torino,
Yeah.
because Gran Torino was a vehicle to opening up this discussion. And I
Yeah.
learned this from when this was just really quickly after the film came out, but I was invited by the University of Pacific in Stockton.
Mm.
I was invited there to speak about prevalent Southeast Asian American gang street violence in Stockton.
Mm.
And what they did was they used Gran Torino as the centerpiece to, this community-wide event,
Yeah.
where they engaged members to come together and to talk about this. So this included Hmong Americans, Cambodian Americans, Lao Americans, and Vietnamese Americans.
Mm.
And that really, allowed me to see exactly, the varying layers of voice and of power, right? And that for me is why I continue to champion my point about films playing such a powerful role in our society.
Mm-hmm.
But to get back to your point about why it is that like there wasn't as much coverage, um, it's precisely because of, as I said in my piece, a failure, an abject failure to assimilate our humanity. Um, you know, we know this that the trope of the model minority is very real
Yeah.
and very consequential. And what it has meant is that, we turned a blind eye to all the anti Asian racism that has continued and is continuing with impunity. And it gets perpetrated by those who do not perceive Asian Americans as a threat or as a community that they should fear enough that they, wouldn't target us.
Mm-hmm.
And because of this, um, people see it less as a real problem to fix. As I said, it's why anti-Asian racism is shunted off to a list of non-essentials.
Yeah.
We continue to hear and we continue to be told that anti-Asian racism is not that harmful. It's harmless. It's not as insidious. And
Mm-hmm.
there's always this kind of comparative racialism or whatever you might call it,
Yeah.
or oppression Olympics
Mm-hmm.
that is at play here, especially with this idea of the model minority. And I think that for sure, this has played into the ways that larger media interests overlooked this issue of Asian Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also believe that so much of what we are able to say today and so much of what is being currently heard is because we are seeing through the smokescreen of American multiculturalism. You know,
Yeah.
it this multiculturalism convinced us that we were colorblind, that we were living, a very happy, harmonious life, but it was a myth.
Mm-hmm.
It convinced us that racism was or should be consigned to the distant past. We heard this during the Obama presidency.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're post-race now, a black president, blah, blah, blah. And it just kind of really mystified us, and made it impossible for us to see um, and name this moment for what it was, that
Mm-hmm.
the racism isn't gone. But things are shifting now, and I think that that's why people are paying attention. And some of this is also part of the work that BLM has been able to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
Um, of course, this is now the fight that we must fight, and we have to continue to provide the ability to speak about ourselves and to think about ourselves in more meaningful ways. And I think
Yeah.
that that's what's so important right now, because no one seems to be able to talk about us at all in a way that
Yeah.
makes any sense,
That's true.
that helps people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's another issue at play as well.
Mm-hmm. So during, I think it was during the premiere, and you were being interviewed, one of the questions was, how tough was it to how tough is it to stand there and let somebody, even when they're acting, call you names? And your response, you paused for a second, and then you said that it was just acting and it was a part of the art. But then I think your facial expression, to me at least, kind of gave it away, where it's like it did hurt you a lot. Do you remember, if you could remember, going back into the film when the like you were being called those racial or Asian racial names? Like, how did it make you feel, really? Because I mean, you told the interviewer that it was just about a part of acting, and it was just about the art and getting through it. But then your face totally like said a different thing. So like,
I was 15 at the time.
yeah.
I had my own life of experiences. But when I got the script and we shot it, it felt like it was truly just a film. It's
Mm,
hard to feel real about something when you are clearly on a film set.
okay.
And by that I meant that like it just felt very artificial.
Yeah.
And because of that, I never really took it seriously. And it
Mm,
never affected me in the ways that it might have if it were to be said to me, if those slurs were used against me in real life.
yeah.
I mean, I have experiences like that where I have been taunted, bullied, spat on, physically assaulted. And so, I have real memories to draw on. But the
Mhm.
fact is that at the time, this young 15-year-old from my kind of background of a working class Hmong refugee background, you know, I never thought that I would live to see the day that I would be in a Hollywood feature film. And
Mhm.
so a lot of things were coming at me at the time. And when I gave that interview at the premiere, that was before I saw the film itself.
Mm.
But even then, the first experience of watching it, I didn't necessarily feel the things that I did later when I
Yeah.
kept going to theaters in Minnesota and white suburban areas, and I just kept hearing the laughter and so much laughter, and you know experience after experience of going to these theaters and seeing people laughing at it, and sometimes it wasn't just white people, but
Mhm.
a lot of white people were laughing at it,
Yeah.
and I started feeling uncomfortable about by that.
Mm.
It was unnerving because I wasn't sure what the laughing was all about. And so when I went on to lecture and to hold workshops to talk about this issue of is racism okay so long as it's a joke and it makes us laugh? And a lot of people would weigh in and say it just was really uncomfortable, it was hurtful, it was triggering to hear those words. And then you also had people who said it's just a joke. I mean, that's the point of this movie, which is to have this racist character say these things and learn from his mistake.
Mhm.
And that, I said this at the very beginning of my piece, that it's a story about two people who transcend their differences to form an unlikely friendship.
Yeah. The
um,
very
you know,
beginning.
right. So it's like people saying that I'm, just trashing the film just did not read my piece carefully enough. But anyway, this is just to say that like the more that I kept hearing about these different reactions, because that's the point about these movies, is that
Mhm.
people receive it differently,
Yeah.
and that's something that we should consider. Um, there's more, as I said, there's more than one way to interpret a film, just as
Mhm.
there's more than one way to receive a film. And the more that I kept hearing these stories when talked with Asian American audiences at my workshops or lectures,
Mhm.
it became clear to me that like there was something going on, when we continuously get told that it's just a joke, and we say that it's harmful and that it was injurious. There's something about the fact that we have this position and they have
Yeah.
that position.
Mhm.
And for me that became a point of importance that we have to really address.
Yeah. And I think I think it is hard for us because like I said, we're minorities of a minority, so it's like it's hard for us for even other Asians to like take us seriously. You know
Right.
what I mean? I think it's hard because it's like there's people know about four, right? Chinese, Japanese, Korean, and Vietnamese.
Right.
Rarely people will know about Hmong people if you're like Wisconsin or California or the Twin Cities, maybe. But then like I think it's rarely people know about the Hmong people. Most Asians don't even know about Hmong people. You know what I
Right.
mean? So I
Yeah.
think we're like taking advantage of your position and taking advantage of your voice through your experiences, I think really helped. And it really helped me too, because I saw it as like we do have a chance in this, you know what I mean? Like we do have a voice, and it's really important for other Hmong people to understand and have the idea of just having a voice in general. Because I know, like, growing up as Hmong, as young Hmong adults and young Hmong teens, we feel like we don't have a voice because we do have to respect our elders and stuff like that, and we feel like we can't say much
Yeah,
because we're not seen as, important. But I think as time goes on, and cultures progress and adapt to new things, I think it's important for us as young adults to young Hmong adults to realize, like, we do have a voice. And I know a lot of people has been uh you know using their
yeah,
voice for really
yeah.
good things. And the one question is, how do we make it so that people take us seriously?
I refer back to Jeremy Lin's post that
Mm,
he wrote on, I believe might have been Facebook or Instagram, but the one last sentence that he writes, we are here, we're saying that, we experience racism too, as anybody listening. And I think that really resonated with a lot of people.
mhm.
Um, I think it was powerful, and it just really speaks to this moment that
Yeah.
we are currently in that continues to ignore us.
Mhm.
And I think that the way that we counter this is to speak up,
Yeah.
to tell our stories, to take ownership of it, and to find new and better ways to talk and think about ourselves. Um, I think it's really hard for us to find our place in this very bipolar racial schema of the US,
Mhm.
where often Asian Americans seem as a disruption, or something that isn't to be um, integrated into that racial system,
Mhm.
and as a result, we are swept under the rug.
Yeah.
And so I think moving forward, the best way to do is to speak up and to continue finding new ways to think about everything that has
Yeah.
happened. There has to be some kind of a paradigm shift in the ways that we think and talk about things. Um, I think so much of what Black Lives Matter was able to do was to create this language that we're now speaking.
Mhm.
It wouldn't have been possible if all of this didn't become mainstream. I think about talking about this stuff all the time 10 years ago when I started speaking up
Yeah.
about what I was experiencing after Gran Torino came out. And we didn't have these terms like trigger warning or
Yeah.
white supremacy or whatever. Like none of that stuff was would have made any kind of sense. It
Mhm.
was pretty hard at that time to even name race or racism.
Right.
Everyone just kept saying, "Oh, but like, we have a black president. There can't be racism anymore."
Yeah.
And oh, this movie shows that, like, people can learn from their mistakes, and
Mhm.
that's what they do. They make mistakes, and so it's we're getting to a point where like we're able to discuss this more openly and candidly and more intellectually and more honestly, and this is helping us move in the direction of what is right, um, and what will be different. So
Mhm. Yeah. And talking about moving on, let's move on to Gran Torino. So I know I have a lot of questions just because I do in the future want to be in the entertainment and media space. How did you, as a 15-year-old Hmong kid from the Twin Cities, how did you get a leading part in that movie?
like many other Asian Americans, and like Hmong Americans too, I was coerced into wanting to go into medical school.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while, I was pretty set with the idea that I was going to get into medical school and become a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
At this time, I was still very, much of an artist. I was into visual arts. I was into music. I played the violin, the piano, and the flute and the
Mhm.
oboe. I was in my school's orchestra club. I was interested in debate. I was also interested in performance. And by that, I meant like acting, not dancing or any other kind of
Mhm.
performance arts. But that, again, that was the side of me that was an artist,
Yeah.
that compelled me to submit myself for the role when it came out. I don't know how old you are, um, but when it came out, when the notice came out that Hollywood was going to be making a movie about the Hmong American community. I was about 14,
Oh,
maybe a bit younger,
yeah.
but it was the talk of the town and the Twin Cities area. Um, Everyone knew that they were trying to scout Hmong talent to play Hmong characters,
Mhm.
and as a result, I just blindly sent in my headshots, and they said that they liked me and asked me to submit my materials to them, and so they sent me a side. A side is just an excerpt of a script that they give you to read, so that you can actually perform the character and they see what you do with the character.
Mm.
And what happened next was that moved forward. I was moved forward in the auditioning process, and I met with another casting person, and this was an in-person audition,
Okay.
and that was the last of the auditions that I had. I just kept progressing, and after that audition with the casting person, I did not hear back from anyone until maybe 4 or 5 or 6 months later.
Oh, wow.
So, because of that time, I thought that I just didn't get it.
Yeah.
I thought that, like, oh, it probably went to someone else.
Mhm.
Then one day, my cell phone went off, and it was Clint Eastwood's wife
Oh,
who was on the
wow.
phone, or his wife at the time, Dina Eastwood. I don't believe that they're married anymore, but she was on the phone and she asked for my if I were B Vang, and um, I said yes, and she was like, "Well, we wanted to ask you, we would like for you to play the role of Tao Ving Lor in Gran Torino. Would you, be interested?" And of course, I'm like, yes, like, what 15-year-old from my background imagines that they will ever be in a Hollywood feature film?
Mhm.
And, it was the highlight of my summer that year. It
Yeah.
was 2008. It was just like at the end of spring. And then shortly after that, they flew me to Michigan, sent me the script, flew me to Michigan, and then we started shooting.
How long did it, take to make the film?
Oh, geez, I remember talking about this a while back, but I think I've lost the number of days. But I think that they had allocated about 35 to 38 days to shoot the entire film, but we got done in 31 days, or maybe even earlier. I can't remember. But
Mm.
I know that, we were pretty efficient about shooting and were on schedule. And sometimes we were ahead of schedule and had
Oh,
to
wow.
shoot, in different scenes and shoot more scenes.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, that's crazy to think about, like, shooting it in within a month time. I think that's really crazy to think about, and I never really think about how long it takes to shoot a movie. Some takes, like, 31 days, some takes about 2 months or 3 months, but I never realized, is it, like, every day just shooting?
yes, depending on um, your your character's
Mm.
role in the film,
Yeah.
they would schedule you to try to get you out of there the quickest.
Oh.
So, like, if you have a supporting role or a smaller role, like they'll try to do those big scenes where they have like bigger crowds or bigger characters,
Mhm.
or a bigger number of characters. Um, for me, it was almost every day because I was a the lead supporting actor in the film
Mhm.
opposite Eastwood. So I went in every single day. Others went in, periodically, but not as much as me.
Yeah.
And that's, it corresponds to the importance of your character and the
Yeah.
script.
Do you still keep in contact with like Whitney and Dora and even Clint Eastwood?
Um, I try to, but like we have differences and ideas and thoughts and feelings about things,
Mm.
and um, we're still cordial with each other. It's
Mhm.
just been a while that we've talked to each other.
Oh yeah.
But in terms of me and Eastwood, like we haven't spoken since the premiere of Gran Torino. And I've just moved on to do other things in my life at the time,
Yeah.
which was to go to school.
Mhm.
And Clint Eastwood went continued to make more movies. So
Mhm. And since you are coming back into film, like what type of movies are you trying to be in, or are you just like accepting any roles, or are there certain ones where you want to either be a supporting or be a lead or
I always said that I wanted to try to shoot for the stars, and by that I
Mhm.
meant that I wanted to try to get to into Marvel's Shang-Chi. I
Mm.
speak Chinese Mandarin, so I was like, I can
Yeah.
pass. But and of
Right.
course, the other thing is that I have to make the case that there are Hmong people in China, and they are Chinese. So
Mhm.
when you ask for Chinese, you're actually not asking accurately,
Mm.
because Hmong people are Chinese. They are
Yeah.
Chinese citizens. They speak the language. They live in the country. Just as there are Hmong people in Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand,
Yeah.
and Burma. Just because we're Hmong doesn't mean that we're not from or of those countries. I remember a having this discussion with a friend of mine. Um, you know, who I hang out with all the time in LA. She is Vietnamese American and she's an actress as well. And she went to this Vietnamese American social event. It was Vietnamese Americans in entertainment.
Mhm.
Go figure that everyone who lives in LA is in entertainment.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point is that she went there and she said, "Oh, I would have invited you, but it was just a Vietnamese event." And I said, "But there are Hmong people in Vietnam, right? They speak Vietnamese too, right?" And she was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, you're right." And I was like, "It's just, I think it's really funny when when you bring up how we are a kind of double minority and all of this, right?
Mhm.
And most Asian Americans who are none the wiser can't also figure this out themselves. That
Right.
when they talk about their great countries, that they're reproducing this layer of silence around those of us without our own nation states.
Mhm.
And their modernity is what erases us from any kind of claim to an identity, right?
Yeah.
It's like we're Hmong, but then there are Hmong people in Vietnam, but I can't go because I'm Hmong, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just really weird to think about that when it comes to where Hmong people stand and the larger Asian American community. But anyway, this is just to say that I think that what I would love to see happen with Asian American actors and actors of color in general
Mhm.
is that we have the ability to um, not have our bodied self be politicized.
Mm.
By this, I mean that um, it shouldn't take a Hmong person to play a Hmong person or a Korean person to play a Korean person. I think about Meryl Streep all the time.
Yeah.
Meryl Streep is American, and I don't think she has any Italian um, heritage in her, but she played an Italian character
Mm.
in
Mhm.
Bridges of Madison County with Clint
Right.
Eastwood. And in Sophie's Choice, she played a um, Polish Jewish woman who
Right.
spoke German.
Mhm.
And it's just weird to think that, like, hey, we don't have to think about ethnic specificity when it comes to white actors. But why
Yeah.
should it matter so much? As if only a Hmong person can breathe life into a Hmong character.
Yeah.
If that were the case, like I can only ever play a role if it's a Hmong role, and
Yeah.
it's kind of ridiculous that we are pigeonholed this way.
Mhm.
And another example that I think about, someone told me about this theater company that was producing a play about Japanese Americans and the internment camps. And a bunch of these Asian American actors were cast, and roughly at the same time, um, this other theater company was producing a show that was, I believe, Elizabethan um, era, that was set in Elizabethan era, and so
Mhm.
they spoke a particular kind of English.
Yeah.
And they obviously cast a bunch of white people, but what they did was they hired all these specialists and accent experts and everyone, from historians to whatever,
Yeah.
to come and teach these white actors about how English might have been spoken then, what
Mm.
the continents of a Elizabethan English person might have been like, or how
Yeah.
they carried themselves. But these Asian Americans being pumped into this play about Japanese and American internment experience were
Mhm.
expected to just perform
Yeah.
this experience,
Mhm.
like as if we aren't artists, working on the craft of our art and our acting.
Right.
And so that's one thing that like I really want to see happen. And I think that the other thing, of course, is that, as I have learned, as any, a person of color who pursues this and this career in this industry,
Mhm.
you can't ever just be an actor. I learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
I told you about going to speak at the University of Pacific.
Mhm.
I suddenly became the face of this community because of this film.
Yeah.
Like, white actors don't have to worry about that. Like, a film is just a film in their
Right.
case.
Mhm.
Whereas, like, suddenly now, like, the entire community, rides on our shoulders. And
Mhm.
that's a burden that is unfair. So, like, when stuff like this happens with COVID-19 racism, it takes celebrities and high profile people with
Yeah.
some kind of a platform to be able to give space to
Mhm.
talking about these issues, and that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with
So
that.
I want to
Um,
move beyond all of that, and that's
mhm.
where I would like to see this industry move in the direction of.
Yeah, do you know who Timothy De La Ghetto is?
Yes, of
Yeah,
course.
so I feel like what you said, it really related to him, because he's the one Asian guy that made it onto, like, MTV and Wildin' Out
Oh yeah, yeah.
and all that stuff, and a lot of Asian people look up to him and wanna be where he's at, and that puts a lot of pressure on him to be that voice of Asian people in, like, the
Yeah.
mainstream media, and I think, like, we don't even know if he wanted that type of pressure, right? Like, we don't know if he wanted that or if he did want it, or but then I think it's funny how, like you said, like, it is a very, like, he when he came up, he came up with that type of pressure, but then if another, like, white actor or white influencer came up like that, he doesn't have to carry the same pressure as, you
Right.
know Tim did. So I think I never really looked at it like that. I just thought, like, I was just like, we come up and then we bring everybody up too, but then what if, like, sometimes we come up because we work so hard for that spot and we were finally there, but then we might feel the obligation of our people too. So it is a
Right.
very interesting topic to talk about as well.
It is a conundrum.
Mhm.
It's like, we want to be seen as human beings, but then suddenly, we're cast for the fact of being Hmong, or,
Mhm.
in his case, being Asian, or like, in the case of Kelly Marie Tran and Ryan the Last Dragon, it's now that, the entire Vietnamese American community
Yeah.
is being represented by
Mhm.
her. And it's just like, it's just, it's such a crazy concept to wrap our minds around, because only people like us in this industry, people of color, have to
Mhm.
deal with this.
Yeah.
It's like Meryl Streep won't have to go and talk about the Polish community after Sophie's
Yeah.
Choice, like like I did when I was
Mhm.
invited to the University Pacific.
Yeah. That is crazy. I didn't even know, like I didn't even think about like that, you know what I mean? Like, you have to keep advocating and keep doing speeches and keep up with what you did, in the past, but then for, white actors, it's like a job. They clock in and then they clock out, right?
Yeah, it's not fair.
Mhm.
Um, I would say that it's just really not fair. And it's precisely why I have to maintain that, when people say that actors shouldn't speak up or that celebrities shouldn't speak up, it's both wrong and somewhat right because,
Mm.
we have to use our platforms. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like, why is there an expectation?
Yeah.
We're just actors, we're
Mhm.
not the activists and on ground organizers, blah, blah, blah. But like, it's mind-boggling, as I said
Yeah.
earlier. And it just means that we can't ever be actors
Yeah, for
or
sure.
can't ever just be actors.
Yeah. And, going back to talk about Gran Torino, I know we kinda made a big tangent there.
No,
But,
no, sorry.
what was your favorite part about filming? Like, you're a 15-year-old and you see Clint Eastwood, you see all these cameras on you. What was your favorite part of, shooting?
I think the favorite thing about shooting was just being on set. It's very lively. It's
Mm.
fun. Um, I had a lot of fun, and it definitely it definitely felt unique, in that I was trying to create a world and trying to convince the camera that the world that I was creating was real.
Mhm.
And there's something powerful about that, which is why I came to the realization that like acting is a powerful medium.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like it.
Mhm.
And that was one of the many lessons that I learned from Gran Torino and from continuing to, work on the craft of my acting,
Mhm.
even after Gran Torino. And even when I decided that I wanted to become a journalist and a professor and a whatever. But I think that that was what was the most fun about my experience, getting to
Yeah.
see that being done on an actual multi-million dollar like production.
Yeah,
That was exciting.
for sure. And now, like you said, you're getting back into acting. Are you taking any, like, acting classes?
I'm currently working with a coach,
Okay.
and I'm just currently reading as much as I can and learning on the side.
Mhm.
I'm also working with an NGO to continue doing other kinds of advocacy work. So that's currently what I'm trying to uh, to work out, which is just
Yeah.
to find that balance between both um, both interests that I have, being an
Yeah, for
actor and
sure.
being someone who is an advocate for
Mhm.
issues.
Yeah. I mean, kudos to you. I think that's a very, very, hard and challenging thing to do, to tackle 2 different things. Like you said, you're just not an actor, so
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
yeah. Well, what are some advice for, like, people like me, young adults who wants to be in the entertainment industry or be in this, media and entertainment game, because you've been in it and you're beginning to, go back into it. So,
My advice is to be as well-rounded of an individual as you can be. By that I mean, you know, have the intelligence to speak up for yourself, to be the best self advocate for yourself that you can be. Um, if you can't do any of this, then you can't survive in a industry that really depends on the sheer force of the will to make it. Um, I mean, I haven't been, the most successful in this industry,
Hmm.
but I know that in order to succeed, you have to be, you know, charismatic. You have to be able to engage people. You have to be able to engage in small talk. You have to be able to go and network. You have
Hmm.
to be able to prove to people that they should want you.
Yeah.
And that is uh, the primary um, lesson that I will impart to anyone listening to this. Um, it's very necessary. And at the same time, in addition to being a well rounded person, you have to know the craft. You have to have a product that is so good that it makes you stand out. And that product is your craft. It is acting. It is, producing podcasts or whatever. And that product that you're selling has to be good enough to convince people that you should be a talent that they you know look out for.
Yeah. A talent that they can't deny, right?
Exactly.
Hmm. And we have a segment on the podcast. It's top five, dead or alive. Who would you like to have a sit down dinner conversation with?
5 people.
Yes.
Oh geez, I feel like this the answers I give would be telling about about me. Would reveal a lot about my political views. um I would say that the 5 people that I would love to talk to and sit down and have dinner with is Genghis Khan,
Mm,
um, Aristotle, Karl Marx, um, hmm, Karl Marx, B. Arthur, um, and Edward Said.
mm. Very, very good picks. Um, so going back, being a Hmong actor, is it hard for your families or for your parents to understand what you're trying to do?
I think it was easier for them to understand because I had already
Right.
achieved a pretty, you know, um, a goal.
Yeah.
For any actor to be in a feature film like this with, Clint Eastwood, that
Hmm.
is the best thing that you can do and accomplish
Yeah.
as an actor. And so, because of that, like, I think my parents didn't really have much to say. Like, if I were to just not go to school and, run off to Los Angeles before like, an opportunity like Gran Torino came up,
Hmm.
my parents would have been like, "No, are you insane? Like, why would you run to LA with no education and blah 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 and try to be an actor?"
Hmm.
But because I was given this opportunity so early on in my career as an actor, I think that um, it's easier for them to not be so worried.
Yeah. And do you think it is insane for, Hmong kids to have a dream and like you said, not go to school, but then take their craft seriously as into acting or singing and take classes or take like you said, have a coach and focus on that and focus on their dream and their goal. Do you think that is kind of insane or is that just the same as going to college?
I think we live in a society that doesn't necessarily give out the fair and equal opportunities to everyone.
Mhm.
And I think that, it's become quite clear to everyone that this country is functions by way of a spoils system.
Mhm.
Everyone that gets anywhere has known someone. And it's no coincidence that, what I have always been critiquing for several years now, for almost
Yeah.
over a decade,
Mhm.
is that Hollywood is a predominantly white institution.
Mhm.
Um, it perpetuates that. And we see that today,
Yeah.
when everyone continues to point out just the lack of diversity, the lack of voices, and every single stage of production, from
Yeah.
writing to making, to acting to directing to filming to film distribution.
Yep.
And the reason why I bring this up is that I think that it's not always viable for us to dream the same dreams that maybe our white peers might be able to dream.
Mm.
And I made it clear also that, what person from my kind of a background, a Hmong American, an Asian American, a working class person, it's hard for us to imagine that any of this would have ever happened.
Yeah.
And because of that, it should tell us that, we can't put all of our eggs in one basket.
Mhm.
At least not until the playing field is leveled out. So that who and what we are doesn't determine, what we can become.
Yeah.
Because clearly, we have learned that, you know, who and what we are can sometimes determine what we can be.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point and a very good way to end the podcast. I have to go to work in a little bit, so but B, I think it was like a very good talk that we had. You got to clear up a lot of understood. You got to clear up a lot of people who misunderstood your article, and kind of give more points to the article that I think it needed for people to understand it more clearly and get your message more clearly. So I'm glad that we were able to do that and to just ask you questions about the film, because I love the film. It got me excited to see a Hmong brother like you and a Hmong sister like Whitney and everybody else, all the OGs that was a part of it, to be in a film that big and that impactful for all of us, whether it was good and also bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
And
exactly how I see it too.
yeah.
I don't see it as good or bad, or good or evil.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. And, great to hear that you're coming back into acting, and hopefully we get to see you in many more films to come in the future.
thank you.
Yeah. And is there any last things you want to say? Any social medias you want to plug?
um, Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. Hashtag be Vang.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
And is there any like projects you're coming out with anytime within the year?
Um, some, but some I'm not sure yet if I can talk about
Oh, okay.
publicly. So
All right. Yeah, make sure everybody go and give B Vang a follow, and let him know what you guys think about all this stuff, and let him, I'm he's a very cool and humble guy. He's very educated in what he talks about, and I'm pretty sure if you guys have a good conversation, you will take out something from it. So make sure you guys like, subscribe, and share this video. Follow me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Instagram, all that stuff. I'll leave it down in the description as always. And make sure you guys have a blessed day and always follow your passions. Peace.